Hello. My legend today is something a little bit different in that even though, like all our legends, he's revered by news and current affairs junkies for his towering, glittering past achievements, but he also has much, much more to come. That's because he currently sits atop the pinnacle of British broadcast journalism. He's been political editor of ITN and the BBC, amongst many, many other jobs, and he's now one of the chief presenters of Radio 4's Today programme. For where he's hot-footed it after another hectic day of broadcasting to be with us today. So, plenty to discuss about his glittering career, but also his hinterland, including his beloved Manchester United and our shared connection to one of the greatest songs of all time. All's going to be revealed about that, just to say it. It involves Freddie Mercury. He is, of course, if you haven't worked it out already.
I really have to pick a bone with you about that.
But get on to that. He's Nick Robinson. Hello, Nick. How are you?
I listened to that introduction. I thought, I want to meet this guy. Who is this towering, glittering legend?
He's legend of news. Yeah. Well, listen, I know, given, how self-effacing you are, and you'll have hated that in some ways, because in your self-description, you're a Northern RC hack, and you'd be as happy doing what you're doing for, the Macclesfield Express as you are for Radio 4.
Northern Arsey and confrontational, I think was the quote. Yeah, I was once doing a newspaper interview. I think I was a bit knackered, frankly, and I thought, why the hell am I doing this interview? And I was trying to find a way of describing myself. And in a sense, I was comparing myself with my mentor, the guy who really got me wanting to be a journalist, a guy called Brian Redhead, who did the job I now do, was presenter of the Today programme alongside the likes of John Humphreys and Jim Nocte, John Timpson, Sue McGregor and others for many, many years, who just happened to be my best mate's dad. So I knew him from the age of 8. And I think he was Northern Arsey and confrontational, although he never knew that I would follow him. Sadly, he died before I ever got close to the microphone at the Today programme studio. In a sense, he's always been a bit of a role model.
That is so weird, though, isn't it? To actually not just meet your hero, know him, and of course, be best friends with his son, and then end up sitting in his chair.
It's really odd, actually. And I didn't think it would happen, in a sense. When you're 8, you don't think of that. But I do look back and think, given that I came from a family in which there were no journalists and there were no people particularly interested in politics either, where did I get it from? Bit from my grandparents, but who were much more political, but a lot from Brian, because as an 8-year-old kid, the Redhead house was on my walk home, and I would probably 2, 3, 4 days a week would pop in, when I was very young, have a glass of milk at the breakfast bar. And there, what I remember is there's a copy of the Mail and the Guardian. And even at that age, I quickly worked out, these are a bit different, aren't they? The Mail and the Guardian. And I got talking. And Brian, doing the weird hours that I now do, was often there during an afternoon.
But you were 8. Were you really 8 when you started reading The Guardian and the Mail and discussing current affairs with Brian Redhead?
You're making me sound like William Hague, who confessed that he'd read Hansard till he was 12. No, but I do remember those moments of just thinking, what's that about? Yeah. And Redhead's genius was that although, frankly, he was pretty, what would be the word, arrogant with people in his own sphere, right? He was fascinated by, and I hate this phrase, but I can't think of a better one, ordinary people. He would often come to a conversation and said, I was talking to the butcher. Now, the butcher was the captain of his local cricket team, and he thought wisdom resided in the butcher. He loved cricket, so he's met him every week during the summer, and he would pass on some bit of wisdom. Or he once said to me, I had a really interesting conversation with the guard. I went, what do you mean the guard? And in the old days when he had a guard's van on the train, and he'd be getting the train down.
It's a long time ago, isn't it?
Indeed, from near Manchester. We're that old, Dermot, we're that old. He was getting a train down to London. And on one occasion, he said, I just sat in the guard's van for the entire journey because he found this guy's conversation. He was learning about the world.
And did that come out in the interviews as well? Because it's almost irrefutable if you say, well, I was talking to the guard or, the local butcher to a politician. They can't then say, well, that's just what you think, you idiot. It actually has authenticity, doesn't it? That source.
I think it does, but it also just forces you to rethink, doesn't it? We live, the cliche that we all live in a bubble. Westminster, which I've covered for so long, is, of course, its own bubble. And London is not the same as the rest of the country. And just anything that gets you out of it and makes you see things in a different way and say, oh, look, that's what people are asking.
I'm really interested about this 8, 9, 10 or whatever year old who was interested in cover because it chimes with me.
Yeah.
I'm slightly older than you, but also what I want to ask is, was there an event or events of that time? So we're talking what? Early 70s, born 62, right? So early 70s. That kind of grabbed your attention because for me, it was 1967 and it was the 6-Day War, and a teacher at school in my primary school who got all the charts up, of who's trying to invade Israel. And weirdly then thinking with current times, everyone was on the side of the underdog, which was Israel, because they were attacked by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and, saw them off within 6 days. But I just remember that grabbed me. I wrote essays about it, and I would have been 9, 10 years old.
Yeah. Interestingly, for me, it was the miners' strike. Not the one that people tend to think of now in the 80s against Margaret Thatcher, but the 3-day week. So I would have been, 10?
Yeah.
9 or 10. Ted Heath's government, Tory Prime Minister at the time, brought to its knees, lost the election because it fought a battle with the miners and lost. And just listening to the reporting from someone who then went on to be a colleague, Nick Jones at the BBC, was the great chronicler of the miners' strike then and in the 80s as well. And I just was gripped. And I do have memories of kind of sitting on our kitchen table, when you're little and your legs are swinging there, and my mum would bring me a piece of cake, and listening to PM on Radio 4, which was on when I got back from school, listening to that and just thinking, this is great. And for some other reason, the other story that sticks in my mind is the Jeremy Thorpe trial.
So that's a bit later.
That's later. Is that 79?
78, 79.
Yeah, it's quite a lot
79,
later.
yeah.
But I'm just thinking of stories that really stick in my mind. There was a reporter called Graham McLagan who used to report every day. And it's impossible to convey to people not of that age unless they saw the drama, brilliant drama about the Thorpe trial. Might still be on iPlayer if you can watch it, which was about this extraordinary conspiracy by the then leader of the Liberal Party to murder his gay lover. Extraordinary. They shot the dog. Shot the dog by mistake. Yeah.
So, well, that's interesting, that it was something like that. But then at home, were you discussing news and current affairs, or was it just with the Redheads?
My parents actually became friends with Brian Redhead and his wife, Jenny. And so they would polish off a bottle of whiskey on a Saturday night sometimes and agree that Margaret Thatcher was destroying the country, right? The funny thing is I came from a very Tory area, and my dad, I suspect, regarded rebellion as voting for the ratepayers. He was not exactly a socialist, right? But he really didn't like Mrs. Thatcher. He thought she was destroying the north of England and destroying industry, and he believed as an engineer in industry. And he and Brian would have these conversations. So I picked up on those chats, not just with Brian, but elsewhere. But the other big influence on me, Dermot, was my grandparents I mentioned. My grandparents were refugees from Nazi Germany, German Jews, who got out very early. And they would religiously listen to the BBC World Service news after lunch every day. Now, they never lived in the UK. They fled to China, went to Japan, ended up retiring in Switzerland. But when I was a teenager, I'd go and visit them in Switzerland, and they'd have this big Roberts radio. And my grandfather got very poor sight, couldn't see where the line was. Yeah. When you had to twist the dial, you didn't have any presets. And he'd go through all these stations, and you'd hear the white noise between them, go shh, and you get Voice of America, and you get, because this is on shortwave, getting the foreign broadcast, you get German radio and French, and he'd always go to the BBC World Service, and we would listen. And I remember, not aged 8, but I think probably 12 or 13, he'd say, he still had his German accent, he'd go, "What do you think of the Middle East crisis?" Yeah. And I want to say, "Grandad, I'm 12. But you didn't. You just think, I've got to have something to say. So we talked.
And one of the most formative, seismic, awful experiences of your life occurred away from these shores as well in France. You mentioned the Redheads, your best mate, Will, his son, and James, your other mate. You went on a road trip around France and tragedy happened. I mean, just tell us as much as you like about that and what influence it had upon you.
So this was a post-A-levels trip. You finish your exams and think, let's celebrate. And we were planning to go for a month's tour of Europe, including, first stop, my grandparents who lived in Lausanne in Switzerland on Lake Geneva. And we barely made it off the ferry. We're in a packed car. And my mate Will was driving, James was in the front, I was in the back, which is what saved my life, because tragically they both lost their lives. And there was a head-on collision. God. I think Will, bless him, just misjudged an opportunity to overtake in a big packed car, and a car came the other way, and they both swerved in the same direction. It said in the crash report afterwards. Car blew up and I was stuck in the back. But as I say, that is almost certainly what saved my life. I say almost certainly because I don't really remember very much about it. I mean, I remember giving up, actually. The moment I remember is thinking, I can't get out of this car. I'm stuck and it's on fire.
Crikey.
Yeah.
And Brian, though, took you under his wing a bit after that.
Well, it's a more complicated story than that. You know, he'd lost his son.
Yeah.
And actually, no, I didn't talk to Brian again for 2 years. Oh. And I was incredibly close. I mean, I'd been on holidays with him and their family. And I think at the time, I was 18, I thought, I didn't really think much about it. I just thought, well, I understand, you know, this terrible tragedies, traumas happened. And I was lucky in the sense that you're at that age where you're just pushing on. I've got to get myself to university. I've got to move on. But I remember thinking, maybe I'll never see them again. And then I came home one Saturday night, and I think between them, they decided not to tell me. The Redheads had come to dinner with my parents, and I didn't know. So I came back kind of 11 o'clock one night. I'd been to the pub, and there was Brian and Jenny, Will's parents. Nothing was said. I just remember he held out a hand. He just gripped my hand, and that was it. And we never talked about it.
I mean,
they came to my wedding, which was for me a very moving thing. It must have been very difficult for them because they were looking around at these young people, knowing that their son would never get married. But
that hand grip, I mean, that says as much as 1,000 words. I mean,
nothing needs to be said.
It's almost more eloquent, isn't it?
I think so. I think nothing needed to be said. He just needed to know that I knew and he knew, and that was it.
But you were already set on a career in journalism, if you could. How did you get in then? You went to university. Were you doing student journalism? What were you doing?
I did a bit of student journalism, but risible quality student journalism. Yeah. There was a very, very rich American graduate who told me he wanted to set up a newspaper, and it's clear that his daddy in Boston or wherever was going to fund a brand new student newspaper called The Sentinel. And he was the only person I knew who had a desktop computer, one of those old original Macs. This is 1983.
Right.
It lasted one edition. Tragically.
I tried. You still got it. I'd love to see it.
I tried to set up a student radio station, but worth knowing for any student who's listening now, they were illegal. You couldn't have. It wasn't just that the technology didn't exist. Yeah. Obviously, there was no internet then. You were not allowed to set up these little local FM.
You'd have been pirate radio.
Yeah. And the law was just about to change, actually, to allow what was called community radio. And I tried lobbying the government and getting permission for an Oxford studio. Anyway, none of it happened.
Good training.
Yeah.
But you ended up, you started at Piccadilly Radio in Manchester.
Yes.
How'd you get in?
Yeah. Well, I've had this car accident. I'm a month in hospital. I get a phone call from Oxford University saying, nicely, don't be daft, take a year to recover. We'll keep the place open. Suddenly I've got a year. But I can't travel like a lot of people in a gap year because I have to have medical treatment quite regularly for a period every day. What do? So the first thing I did was write to the local radio station thinking I'll have a week's work experience. And Piccadilly in those days, commercial radio, was pop music as it is now, but they often had to, by their licenses, do quite a lot of news and current affairs. Piccadilly had a 3-hour a night current affairs programme. Guess how many producers there were?
That'd be you and you.
One.
Yeah.
There was one. There was a presenter, one producer. Yeah. No, I doubled the production staff.
Okay.
So when I came through the door, and it was a bit like on a plane, do you turn right or left? And everybody turned left to be with Chris Evans, who was a DJ then.
No.
Yeah. Timmy Mallet.
Wow.
Yeah, Timmy Mallet got me
legend.
to do the voice of Zach the Zit on the radio. That was my claim to fame. I turned right like the nerd I am and said, can I go and work in the newsroom? And after the week was up, they said, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? Like, what, for the rest of my life? I said, well, no, a few months to do. And I ended up working at Piccadilly.
Brilliant.
Unpaid, I might say.
As a producer, or did you get get to hear that wonderful voice there? Right,
it wasn't bloody wonderful. If it is wonderful now, which I doubt, it was kind of quite squeaky and quite self-consciously mank as well.
What more? Has it gone a bit?
Yeah, I think it comes and goes. I'm accused of.
Does it come back when you go and hang out with your mates?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I present from Salford, people that I'm about to say down south, people in London say, "What was all that about?" You know. Putting on your short A's, your baths, and your.
Well, you become a bit of a mimic. Yeah, I mean, if you've moved around a bit. I mean, I was originally from Northern Ireland, which nobody can guess. I mean, I was born in England, blah blah blah. Yeah. But if I go back to Northern Ireland now and then come back here, they go, "What are you trying to sound like Ian Paisley for?" It's absolutely mad. But the BBC
say no, undoubtedly, like John Cole.
No surrender. You then got picked up quite quickly by the BBC, though, didn't you? After university, was that the trainee scheme?
I was actually, if this is remotely interesting, but I was offered. I was actually offered a job by Granada Telly because I was. They did one of those shows where kids are arsey and difficult with politicians and celebrity. Yeah. So I was on this panel.
Have you seen that Thatcher documentary where the kids get stuck in? Yeah, it's brilliant.
Well, I got stuck in on this Granada show.
I was just trying to remember. It was with hosted by Valerie Singleton.
Yes. I'm embarrassed. I can't remember who hosted this one that I did. It was a regional show, but they got good names. And one of the people they had on was a woman called Victoria Gillick. Do you remember Victoria?
Yeah,
she was the morality campaigner.
She had about 12 children or something.
She had about 12 children, and she thought it was compulsory that everybody else should have 12. That was, in fact, not an accurate summary of her views. But she was someone who was against particularly young women, girls as she would see them, getting the pill or getting pregnancy advice without their parents. It is alleged, said to Victoria Gillick on screen, "You want to have a policeman outside the door of every young woman in Britain." Granada offered me a job and said, "Do you want to come and work in Liverpool in our brand new regional newsroom?"
I can hear that. So an early iteration of that, of those questions. Yeah, just beautifully formed. Yeah. Do you work on them in advance, or do they just come out?
Oh, no, I work on them, but I don't write them, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think an interview's about, I don't know whether you agree with this, because you've done so many. I think an interview's a story. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And too often, I think interviews are a list. I've read this, I've seen that, someone else says that. That isn't an interview. No. An interview should take the listener or the viewer, as well as the person you're interviewing, on a journey. And so the end is often the thing I spend most time thinking about. And the only time I write in full, I will sometimes write, if I think there's a sort of punchline, isn't this what's going on? I suppose it's a bit like a line in Prime Minister's Questions if you're the opposition leader.
Yeah, you can drop it in.
I might write that down, particularly if it's really sensitive, because if you do ad-lib that, particularly on a really kind of controversial subject, the risk is that you'll get that wrong. But I think I was a producer of interviews for 5 years, a bit more. First for Jonathan Dimbleby, then for David Dimbleby.
Well, so that was On the Record and Panorama as well.
Yeah, On the Record was a Sunday lunchtime political program opposite Brian Walden. And then Panorama with David Dimbleby. Yeah. And I felt in the end that the saying I heard then from my editor, which I think is a US military kind of maxim, is plans are useless, but planning is invaluable, is the right thing for an interview. People who just stick, you've got a few notes there, right? No more than that. You've done your research.
Well, I do the weird thing, which I know you do, which is listen to your interview and have a conversation.
And respond. They go, "Oh, really?" Yeah. But the ones that are disaster, aren't they? When you can hear someone, you think, I joke, and I'm not going to say who, but there are certain people who you can hear on air. And the interview says, "And that's when I decided to murder my mother." And they then go, "Do you like?"
Yes.
And you think, no, you see that thing they just said there? In fact, I did produce a moment like that. You've reminded me.
Go on.
So I was a producer on Britain's first, not the world's first, Britain's first 5-day-a-week chat show.
What's that?
The Pamela Armstrong Show. Do you remember Pamela?
Pamela Armstrong used to work at ITN for a bit, didn't she?
So Pamela was the first, I think I'm right in saying, ITN female newsreader.
Right.
Because ITN needed an answer to the greats at the BBC, Angela Rippon. Was Jan Leeming that era as well? I think she probably was. And she did so well that she was poached to the BBC to run a chat show. And I like Pam, and if she's listening, I apologise for this story in advance, but I don't think interviewing was her, strong suit. And Russell Harty, the great talk show host,
great interviewer,
came on. It was the end of his career. He'd written a memoir, and he was a great anecdote teller, great storyteller. So he came on and he said, "Well, Pam, that's the reason," he says, triggering this story, "I had to kickstart a helicopter in Scotland." And then he pauses for effect. And I'm like, I'm 23 and I'm going, what's you going to say? Because it's not in the brief. There's no question following. To which the answer became, "Do you like Scotland, Russell?" And Harty did what you've just done, but then looked for the red light on the camera and went, "Anyway, the reason I had to kickstart a helicopter in Scotland," carries on with the story. And it taught me a lesson. Bloody well listen to what the person's saying.
But so you're saying you're producing then? I mean, you learn an awful lot then, particularly in situations like that about the process. But did you always yearn to then get in front of the microphone, radio or TV?
Well, I applied in a way to do what you did, to be a news journalist, and didn't get the job. The BBC turned me down. I was a bit arsey in the interview, in truth. I had a row with the editor of the 6 o'clock news about the day before's bulletin, which I think he probably didn't like.
Well, I'll tell you what happened to me in my original news trainee interview was they obviously asked me about the Today programme. And, I was like 22, 23. And I said, I don't listen to it.
Yeah.
BBC Breakfast had just started. I said, I'm a TV generation. I love TV. I said, I can talk to you about Frank Boff and Selena Scott. And they kind of looked at me like I was, what? You don't listen to the Today programme? I said, well, you can't do both.
Yeah, I love that. The television, I bet there is that.
But it's their own product.
Yes, how weird. Yeah. Well, you proved them wrong by ending up presenting it, of course, didn't you?
What I always wanted to do. Not quite me, filling Brian Redhead's chair, but, for me it was Frank and Selena. I know Frank had his problems and I don't. but hey, that was a blast as well. Yeah. But this isn't about me, it's about you. So, that question, you wanted to present, to report.
Well, I think, I hadn't really thought it through, but I think if I, honest with myself, probably at the back of my mind, I always thought, that job Brian did, that's a cracker. Now, I absolutely didn't have a bit of paper, Michael Heseltine style, with a sort of plan.
Yeah.
I really didn't have that master plan at all. And I love producing, and I got a real kick off live events. And I think what probably happened is this. I'm at Panorama, and in those days, it didn't just do films. 8 times a year, Panorama did big. I mean really big studios, quite often 250 people in the audience. They were really controversial. They were live. So it was a massive operation. And the buzz I got off the liveness of it, off the sense that anything could happen, I think meant that when I got a call out of the blue, actually, ironically, by the man who is now the chairman of the BBC, who at the time had just moved from being my boss at Current Affairs to become the boss of BBC Westminster, Samir Shah has said, look, we're piloting a show. You know a lot about politics. Will you come and be in the chair? And it was made very clear to me, we're not piloting you. We're not testing you out for the job. We know we're going to give this show, but we want to test the format. And you'll have fun. And I got home after the pilot and went, what the hell am I doing? I need to do that. And what I didn't realise is they watched me and went, he's quite good at this. And then I got offered a job as a reporter.
And then became political correspondent not too very long after that for BBC News. And unlike quite a lot of people I talk to, and we're talking to a lot of people, who became political reporters, editors, some of them kind of, did it by accident and, said, well, I wasn't particularly interested in politics, but then it catched me or whatever. For you, that was very different. That was your furrow. That's where you wanted to do your ploughing. Yeah.
You're very kindly and generously not pointing to my embarrassing past, so I will, right? Look, I was a student hack. I did politics as a student. Yeah. I did a lot of it, and I was fascinated by it. And I think I had something that wasn't all that common in the newsroom then, which is I understood the Tory party. And the Tories...
Because you've been a young Conservative, which is a bit weird, for a young fella during the Thatcher years.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, is that because... That's because you're arsey. That's because you're a contrarian, isn't it, as much as anything? And family background.
I think there's a bit of where I came from. There's a bit of family background. There's a bit of grandparents.
Yeah.
We're talking about the past, but I was a cold warrior. You know, having had grandparents who'd fled Berlin, for me, the defining issue of my era was the Cold War. And the thought that actually this division of Europe was an obscenity and should not be accepted. So that actually drove my politics. Now, I still get now like, well, you're a Tory.
Yeah.
I get other people, of course, say the opposite. But in a way, I want to say the thing that was defining it is gone. I mean, the Berlin Wall's been down longer than it was up now. I keep having to remind myself of that.
I still think, though, it's because you're a contrarian.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you won't be told, will you?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if they say turn left, you go right.
Yeah. Well, I quite like that.
Well, you've got to be a journalist, haven't you?
Well, I enjoyed on Panorama, for example, I'm editing other people's films. People come in and say, we're doing this film on the NHS. And I was going, have you considered privatising it? And you could just see the look of horror on their face. I said, why haven't you asked the question? It might be a totally ridiculous idea, but if you don't ask the question, how do you know the argument in the other direction? And in a sense, my children find it incredibly annoying. I don't know if you do the same at home, which is whatever is said, I argue the opposite case. It's like, will you stop it?
It's almost a reflex, isn't it?
What do you actually think?
Why do you think that?
And I get to the point where I don't know what I think on a lot of things.
But people are able to convince you with arguments as long as they're well formed. If you go into a situation, I'm guessing you're kind of thinking, yeah, well, you know, I can argue this side, I can argue that side, but you know, to find in my core what I think, you make a cogent argument with the facts and marshal them, and you will convince me.
Exactly that. And there's a pleasure in getting your brain around an argument, saying, oh, well, hold on, this is their case. And then equally, it's pleasurable to say, well, hold on, the problem with that is this, and the problem with that is the other. And to do that. And the problem with news today, I think, is there's less and less respect for that process.
Yeah.
There's more and more desire just to have someone shouting at you and the presenter shouting back at them. Which is just pointless.
And lots of clicks for the clips that are put up on. Are you? I mean, given how political you are with a small p, are you mates with any of the politicians? And what's your attitude towards them? I know you've been asked this before, but I mean, it is fascinating given the time you spent at the coalface. You know, do you actually think I could be? I could like this person personally, or do you always keep that distance?
Largely. And the reason I'm being slightly careful what I say is, I was about to say, I don't have politicians round my house for dinner.
No.
But that doesn't mean I've never done it, right? There are one or two people I've got to know well. But in the sense of, is my friendship circle, and there are some journalists who do this, you know, just love mixing with the people they're around. They tell great stories. They pick up stories from them. And there are others who are religious about standing outside. Jeremy Paxman.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's that phrase? You know, the relationship should be between a journalist and a politician should be as that between a dog and a lamppost. Yeah. Is that where you are?
No.
Right.
You know, and Paxman famously, although it wasn't his quote, it's associated with him, had this quote about why is that lying bastard lying to me. Yeah. I'm now forgetting. I think it was an American that originally said that was what should be in your mind. I do not believe that. I don't think they're bastards, and I don't think we should assume they're lying. I think we should.
That's my headline.
You know,
Nick Robertson doesn't think politicians are bastards.
Breaking news. I think we should be properly sceptical. We should be questioning, but we shouldn't have an approach that says somehow we're morally virtuous. We are arbiters of truth. And here is this kind of scum who's kind of floating through the studio talking us down a line.
And is only in it for themselves and all that. Yeah. All those current perceptions. I mean,
God,
it is all getting a bit lazy. I mean, what do you think? And this is the broad question, and to which there is no answer, but it'd be interesting to get your perspective on politicians. You know, We've been around a while, 40 odd years and more. And you can't stop it, can you? In your head, you're thinking they're just not of the caliber as they used to be. You know, you think back, the Robin Cooks, the ones that are still with us, the Ken Clark, so many of them, that you just thought, who would answer that question I put to you was, I could have a glass of wine with these guys and just chew. And you do it on your podcast, Political Thinking. I mean, you get there. But do you think that, the calibre has actually fallen, or the fact is that they are still, by and large, the vast majority of them, public servants who are trying their best, just some of them are actually not very good at it and a bit incompetent.
Both things could be true, by the way.
Yeah.
They are human beings. And I think, as you say, I do this podcast in which I get them to tell their life stories on political thinking. And I think often they're fascinating. Often you think, God, I didn't realise that. They really do know about the real world. Okay, even people who are privileged, they've had some trauma in their life or something. But they may not always be the calibre of some of the previous generation. Now, partly, and I'm not that old that this is to do with me, but partly formative events like the war shaped the quality of politicians we got after. They had served together. You look at a Ted Heath or you look at a Dennis Healey. They had fought together against appeasement when they were students at Oxford, despite the fact that one was leader of the student Conservatives and one was leader of the student Communists, Dennis Healey at that time. Roy Jenkins was leader of the Labour Party, and they formed an alliance to defeat the appeasement candidate in a by-election in Oxford in 1938. So there's partly that factor going on, and people shaped by the Cold War, I think, as well. Events, I just think, have meant, and you've got to look globally for this, have made it just much harder for politicians. The pitch that any politician has to make is peace and prosperity. And although we've had peace in the sense of we haven't ourselves been at war, our troops have been involved in lots of wars in our adult lifetime, none of which have gone very well, and that people don't feel security at home because of terrorism. On prosperity, clearly for almost 20 years now, living standards have stumbled. So any politician would be stumbling. And I get kind of irritable with people who complain either about the politicians or we journalists, say, it's your fault we've got either Corbyn or Farage or whoever they don't like. And I go, am I to blame for Marine Le Pen? Am I to blame for Geert Wilders? I mean, guys, wake up, look around the world. Something's going on. And the idea that it's either the BBC's fault or it's the whichever party you don't like's fault. There's a global anger there,
really is,
from people who just think you lot, your class, and I'm afraid they include us in that.
Yeah, they do.
You're not delivering.
Well, kind of caught up in this cycle, doesn't it? It seems to be getting, social media involved in it as well. And I've got to phrase this carefully, is democracy partly to blame as well? The electoral cycle, and you and I both love football as well, and I kind of think of it like that. The electoral cycle, by and large, in the United Kingdom is 4.5 years, unless a government gets into trouble and it runs the full 5. And it's just too short. You can't deliver. You can't, restructure your infrastructure investment, for instance, in 4 years. You can't, borrow enough to see the fruits of that investment later on in that time. And in football, it's the same. Marched up to the top of the hill every time. Well, you never really get to the top of the hill. There's the sunlit uplands. We're going to get there this season, and then whoops, we didn't. But there's always another season. Yeah. And in a way, the electorate have kind of subliminally absorbed that now and think we never get to those sunlit uplands.
Well, politicians have become sort of Ange, haven't they? How many games did he last at?
Ange Postecoglou at Forest. Yeah, it was. I think it was about 7, something like that. And it looks like his success might do fewer.
Kind of preposterous, actually, isn't it? Really. Yeah. And I think the problem is not just the electoral cycle, but actually the kind of attention cycle, if you like, in which, people are seriously having a conversation about whether to evict Keir Starmer and Kebby Badenoch. Seriously, they are. Yeah. I mean, I went cover the Labour conference this year on the Tory one, and to my shock, each time I had a meeting with a minister, and for those who don't know party conferences, a lot of the value for journalists is you speed date senior politicians because they've got time away from their office, away from the red box, away from the civil servants, and you can fill your day. Just let's have half an hour with I better not say any names, but half an hour with this minister or that minister or the other minister, and do it. And I was shocked at that usually you have to draw that out of people. Yeah. And I think 2 or 3 of those meetings began with, she's just bloody useless, we've got to do so. Well, hold on, you've not been in government much more than a year.
Exactly.
And I think, so the attention cycle has got less and less. And the danger, I think, and this is a big challenge for journalists, I think, is we're not talking about substance or policy. We're not talking about actually how you make people better off or actually how you deal with mass migration, which, for goodness sake, doesn't stop at the Channel. It's happening all over the world. You don't have those conversations. What you end up having a conversation about is, will this or that person be sacked? Should they be fired? Was it a gaffe? Did you get a gotcha moment shared on social media? That's kind of bad for everybody.
I mean, but do you get drawn into that necessarily as well? I mean, there must be times when you see an opportunity for such a gotcha moment and think, I've kind of got to do it.
Yeah, but I genuinely think the interviews I do should stand in themselves. In other words, you should be able to listen to it if it's a big interview on the tape program, 12 minutes, not 12 seconds. Yeah. I genuinely don't. And I don't much respect people who do this, think, I know what this is. This is a 30-second clip. I ask this, then I ask it again, then I ask it again. And then I run a clip saying, wouldn't answer the question. It's not. Yeah, there are occasions that is a suitable thing to do.
But you are the tribune of the listener, aren't you? Because on the sense of the not answering the question, and maybe, I'm too far on your side of it, but, I'm there, kind of howling for other interviewers, and probably none of them on the Today programme, like going, Matt, ask the question. Don't let them get away with that. You don't. I mean, you must get some flack for that as well sometimes, and not just from the spads and the helpers, from some of the listeners thinking, well, you ask them on, let them talk. But you're also thinking, okay, it's a lot of time, it's 12 minutes. But in reality, they can bang on for 4 minutes about the achievements that they haven't actually done.
The thing that people don't understand, I think, sometimes politicians, but certainly the audience, is we're on a time limit. The joy we're having in this podcast is you could say to me at the beginning, it's roughly this long. We can wag on as long as you don't have to go to your next appointment, and as long as your producer thinks people won't be switching off in their droves, But it's a serious point. When I do the Today programme interview, it is very rarely longer than 12 minutes, and sometimes it's only 4. Mm-hmm. So when people say to me, why didn't you persist for an answer? I sometimes, if I'm feeling arsy, say, which question did you want me to drop? Which subject did you not want me to ask? You identify that, and I'll keep asking the same thing again and again, even though I knew I couldn't get an answer from it, that they'd said what they were going to say. And you kind of think about that a bit before you go in, but you have to do it in the moment. I'm constantly looking down at, a few headings and thinking, am I prepared to drop that to persist with this? And that is a choice that, because it's live and in the moment, it makes it, I hope, a good listen. But it also means that, every time you come off the end of an interview, you think, oh, God, I could have done that better.
Let's just get you career-wise to the Today programme. So 2002, when you and I crossed paths for the first time as colleagues, very briefly, because I think I left it, it wasn't entirely about you coming along. You joined ITN as political editor and were reunited with Jonathan Dimbleby, I remember,
That's right.
for the election that year.
Yeah.
Why did you leave the BBC? Because, it clearly is, your natural habitat.
Literally just a great job offer. ITV came in out of the blue and offered me to be political editor. I was chief political correspondent on the then news channel called BBC News 24. It was great because it's like CCTV. I mean, no bugger was watching at the time. It was quite new.
Yeah.
But you were effectively a political editor. I went on every trip with Tony Blair right around the world alongside Andy Marr. And suddenly somebody says, well, take Andy Marr on, do it on ITV. And I just thought, you can't turn that down. And not only that, as a kid, I was a huge admirer of Michael Brunson, who was ITV News political editor for, it would have been ITN. We didn't call it ITV News then, did we? And you still don't. You still call it ITN.
Of course.
Yeah.
I just don't like ITV News. Yeah. It's ITN.
Yeah.
And it's muscular.
Yeah. No, I was a great admirer of Michael's. And so I just was flattered into it, in truth.
Yeah. And you did, that was one of the first times then you clashed many times with Tony Blair, and a supreme communicator and ability to deal with interviewees. But I always remember it was the 2005 election, wasn't it? Was it one of the first times that we saw numbers on a bus? It was 35 billion. Was it 35 billion that the Tories were going to going to cut? And what was it you said?
Do you have to lie about your opponent's policies in order to win the election? I think was the. And now I'll tell you why I was so arsey. To use the word that was used earlier, right? My then bureau chief, great guy called Tim Singleton, said, go to this poster unveiling. which was Blair and Brown unveiling the big poster lorry, as they do, for the cameras, which claimed that the Tories were going to slash public spending. Now, being a bit of a numbers nerd, I knew that the figure they were doing was the reduction in the rate of increase in public spending, i.e. not a cut. Public spending was still going to go up under the Tories. It was just going to go up less. And you could still perfectly reasonably argue, well, there are things Labour would give you that the Tories wouldn't. You can call that a cut if you like, but it wasn't technically a cut in public spending. Right? But the real reason I was as arsy as was, when I got there, I discovered no reporters were meant to go. It was for the cameras only. So I am behind this kind of rope, I think, with the cameras. And Blair and Brown are meant to just perform kind of as if people are there, which, by the way, Blair did all the time.
Yeah.
He'd pretend reporters are there. Honestly.
Wow.
He's thinking, yeah, go. And then, it was a trick that he could pull off with the actor in him. And I thought, I have to ask something sufficiently provocative to force him to come to my camera. So that's why it was quite as arsy. And what I didn't realise is that this was being covered live. It was being streamed on the news channels. I just thought it was a photo op and then we'd take it back, and if we got something, we'd use it. When I got back to the House of Commons where I used to work, and ITV, we shared an office with The Sun and The Standard and The Mail on Sunday and Channel 4 News and so on. Literally the people applauded. I said, what do you mean? And I'd had this kind of confrontation with Blair about whether he was lying or not. And it had just been streamed on BBC and Sky, then became a double-page spread in the Mail, a full transcript of who'd said what. Yeah. And frankly, it was only just...
Well, it's quite an achievement getting under his skin, given, as we were saying, how able he was as a communicator. But, I mean, in terms of world leaders, well, I don't know if Tony Blair likes you or not. I'm sure he does. But one that didn't was George W. Bush. You go back to the BBC after that election in 2005. A gap opens up for political editor of the BBC. Presumably you can't turn that down. You loved it at ITN, but you've got to go and do that. And, you deployed several times to the White House. And I remember he liked to single you out because you asked him some quite difficult questions.
Yeah. What he didn't understand is why I always got the first question. Because the White House used to spend hours, I was told later, selecting who would get to ask a question, like Trump does now, in order to get someone, frankly, who they thought would ask an easy one, or they do something which Bush did all the time. They discover it was someone's birthday. So when he was facing a really difficult time, the president then goes, hey, Chuck, it's your birthday. Hey, everyone. I bet his mum didn't realise he'd be asking the president of the United States a question. Chuck then dissolves, because Chuck's not a TV guy. He's used to asking questions from an agency or something and just kind of doesn't know what to say. Whereas number 10 had the rather nice thought that BBC and ITV basically should go first because we had the big audiences. Yeah. So I had over the run of the build-up to the Iraq War at ITN, then at the BBC after the Iraq War, ask him questions like every month or two because Blair spent so much time with him. And on one occasion, I suggested that he was in denial about how the Iraq War was going because it was disastrous and he didn't say it. And he said, it's bad in Iraq, sir. Will that do? Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking it won't do at all because it's not long enough for a television soundbite. I need a lot more than that. So I said something like, I can't remember the exact words, but I said something like, why didn't you say so before? And he exploded. I mean, he properly blew. And we were in a temporary, actually, news conference facility opposite the White House, very close. He wasn't that much further from me than you are now. And he just kept fingers right through the news conference. He'd take a question over here and they'd say, you, sir, should understand. Yeah. And then I went to Camp David with Gordon Brown for his first meeting with Bush. I thought, I've got to kind of calm it down. I can't have another sodding row. I've had too many already. So I put my hand up to Nick Robertson, BBC News, and he said, you still hanging around? I said, well, thank you for your warm welcome to your country, Mr. President. And I asked a really boring question. I mean, genuinely, it was incredibly boring. I thought, phew, got over it. And we're sitting outside in the baking Maryland sunshine. And we've been there for hours waiting. You know what it's like. You wait around. So as you can see, I am not blessed with hair. So I'm like doing this, okay? I'm mopping my head. I'm bright red. I look like, the thing on a zebra crossing, what they used to call the Belisha beacon, And Bush, at the end of the news conference, catches my eye and said, next time you should cover your bald head. And I think, I'm being insulted by the leader of the free world on live coast-to-coast television. And he turns round then to walk to what's called Marine One, which is the presidential helicopter, with Brown. That's the photo opportunity, shoulder to shoulder. And I, like the kid in class who's always got to have the last word, I said, I thought quite quietly, I didn't know you cared, Mr. President. And Bush turns round and says, I don't. And then carries on walking.
That is really,
that's
one to treasure, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're lucky he didn't use an expletive.
Yes.
Well, I said it would be quite good. Now, let's get to the really, really substantive stuff. You, me, and Bohemian Rhapsody.
Oh,
now,
right, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's irony. Children in Need, 2005. You just come back to the BBC.
Yeah.
You know, and
you are never to be
you like
forgiven
me.
for this.
You're worried about being perceived as not any fun,
Yeah.
and you're asked to sing. They were doing a parody of Bohemian Rhapsody, and all the newsreaders, that to recreate the scene where there's four of them there up there in wigs and whatever. I remember just balking at whichever part they gave me because
Freddie Bloody Mercury is the part.
Can't bloody sing, exactly. not a chance. And say, nah, really, I hum along or to one of the other bits. And they said, I think you were a bit late in the studio. They said, well, we'll give it to Nick Robinson. So can you recreate for me Scaramouche, can you do the fandango in a falsetto?
I am still wounded by this. If I had a therapist, I would still be talking about this horror. Because I tried to turn down doing it at all because I thought the idea was gruesome. Yeah. But I didn't want to look like a humorless git, as you say. So in my email, I said, look, I'm terribly sorry, but it's the kids' quiz that night, because usually the newsreaders did it live. Mm-hmm. Like an idiot, of course, they wrote back and said, oh, it's fine, we're videoing it this year. I was like, I wasn't prepared to say, no, I meant I don't want to do it. Yeah. I arrive late. I've actually about to break a story on The World at 1. And I'm at Television Centre, which used to do radio then as well. And I'm thinking, God, I've got about 20 minutes before I've got to go on World War. Oh, my brain is just going on the sourcing. And I just remember the words, Dermot. No, they hand me the part. And I don't need the words. All I'm saying is, Mamma Mia, like in the box, with the four of them. And I just remember vaguely thinking, no, Dermot's changed what he wants it to do. And I'm suddenly presented with Freddie Mercury's part, to which the obvious thing to say at that stage was, are you out of your tiny mind? No. All I think is 19 minutes till The World at 1. So I just go, yeah, whatever, go on. 12 million people saw me sing out of tune.
And still can.
And
still there on YouTube.
I tell you,
I'm there too.
Yeah.
But as I say, not singing.
There was one moment, right, I'm on the train from Macclesfield down to London, and there's a man with a paper. Do you ever have this when you're on the telly a lot? Keeps lowering his paper, looking at you in that sort of, is it you?
Yeah.
Puts his paper up, lowers it. As I get up to grab my coat to get off the train, he says, Mr. Robinson, I've always been meaning to ask you, have you ever recovered from singing out of tune on live national television in front of millions of people? To which the answer was, well, I had, but I now won't.
Well, instead of your towering achievements, that's probably the one you'd be most remembered for amongst the public.
Yeah.
Listen, Nick, I mean, in terms of other things we share, this is serious stuff as well. We both having had cancer battles as well. I mean, people want to know, how are you? I think when you started was 10 years ago, wasn't it, on the Today programme? Yeah. You were hoarse then because you had, was it esophageal operation?
No, well, in fact, I had cancer.
I remember your first day, though. You were.
I shouldn't have.
It was a bit tough. You started maybe a bit too early after the treatment.
I did.
Yeah.
What happens is it actually was a side effect of lung surgery for cancer in the lung. It's not, they hit the nerve that goes to the vocal cords, and I lost my voice. And at one point, barely had more than a whisper, and did massive amounts of voice training and had some surgery to kind of get it back. But you're quite right. I thought I'd got it back, got a bad cold. Yeah. I was so hyped about sitting in Brian Redhead's chair, doing getting back to work. You must know that feeling, which is some people, they're all just want to disappear, right? And no criticism of that, if that's what works for you. Other people are, what proves I'm alive? What proves that I'm not just lost to the illness. He's doing stuff. Yeah. And that's what it was for me. I don't know if the same.
No, you couldn't put it better.
Yeah. And so I was desperate to get on, but so I've got a cold. I haven't got a voice. And when I walk in, they say, you know, the bomb that went off in Paris, the first big bomb in Europe, the Bataclan, I think it was, but it wasn't one of the very first bombs. You're interviewing the Prime Minister, 8:10. I've got no voice. And I should have just pulled out. It was a daft. I will confess to you, I went for a coffee afterwards and cried. Just thought, that's it. I blown my career. That's it. It's over.
But health-wise, here we are 10 years later. Yeah. You're good. I mean,
I'm good.
And you sound great.
I'm lucky. I still, you know what it's like. Yeah. I had a scan this week. So far, so good. So, you know, it's...
And other things, you know, not directly related to broadcasting, I've got to discuss the football because, you know, I'm obsessed by it as well. And I know you live quite near, you know, the best team in the world, Arsenal. I'll say it. Okay, don't hate me. But, you know, and you support what used to be, by their own measurement, the best team in the world, Manchester United.
Just got a brief blip.
Tough days at the moment. But back to what we were talking about, giving people enough time. I was thinking, you know, there's a parallel there with Alex Ferguson because he was appointed, in 86? Didn't win anything till, 92, 93, the Premier League years. Yeah. He would never have got there in the current era, would he?
Won a cup, didn't he? I can't remember.
Oh, right. Okay, well, you know it. Yeah. But, you know, Premier League, you know, which... Manchester United thinks it's entitled to.
Yes, it'll be a while.
I mean, it took a long time, which he wouldn't have had now, would he?
No, I don't think there's a chance. Well, look what's happened since.
Yeah.
You know, one of the great privileges of my career, you and I, basically newsmen, but we occasionally, you do game shows and all the rest of it. I haven't done that. But the great privilege is you sometimes get to do things where you think, shall I pay the BBC rather than the other way around? And I managed to sell to Fergie and then sell to the BBC a documentary about his leadership style. So actually, when I woke up after my surgery in hospital, the first text on my phone was from Alex Ferguson. And I don't say this to kind of name drop or show off. I barely knew the man. But I had approached his son, who was his agent, about making this documentary. And they decided that they would do it with me because they wanted a non-sports journalist to look at his leadership style. So one of the great privileges of my life was to sit down and we did 8 hours of interview over 2 days talking about it and then flying out. I went to the training ground with Real Madrid and interviewed Cristiano Ronaldo. Went to Chelsea to interview Jose Mourinho. Yeah. Etc., etc. And that was fabulous.
So you're kind of sports presenter Monkey as well. I mean, I'm just thinking about that. My great parallel with that is, for me, it's Arsene Wenger, obviously. And Arsene Wenger's autobiography came out towards the end of 2020. And I also, said, well, I've got to do the interview with him about it. I was at Sky at the time. And, it's got to be me and Arsene. I'd never met him, I loved the guy from start to finish. And it was, he'd been ousted by Arsenal. The fans had turned against him. I was, kind of almost fighting in the stadium with the Wenger out fans. I was, no. Who else are you going to get? It's going to be Sam Allardyce. We get, stick with him, But anyway, he went, get the interview about his autobiography. It's 2020, COVID, height of COVID. American election is approaching. I've got the I visa that gets you into the United States. I mean, a COVID I visa. It's a one-way ticket. Bloody Donald Trump got COVID. Do you remember that? Just before the election of 2020. I said, right, you've got to go. He might die. I went, but I've got to interview.
Did you never get to do it?
No, because you can't come back. So I had to stay there till the election. It's a one-way ticket. They said, so Arsene's people said we can put it off a week. But I'm still there. I'm still there, But the autobiography's coming out. So never met Arsene Wenger. So Arsene, if you want to come on, we'll just make a special category
if anybody's listening, get Dermot and Arsene together. Wouldn't that be fun?
It would be fantastic. Well, and Sir Alex. Did you see that? It was lovely, wasn't it, the other day? Him and Kenny Dalglish sharing chocolate buttons.
They got that Cadbury's packet. You could recognise the colour, couldn't you? There at Anfield. My boys were both season ticket holders at the Stretford End. They were at Anfield. And they've only been to Anfield twice. I took them once when we beat Liverpool 1-0, Wayne Rooney scored. I missed this game, and it was the second time.
They must go more often then.
Lucky charm.
Well, you did Arsenal a big favour there.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Let's hope it continues that way by losing to us at the Emirates. Listen, we could talk about this all day long. There's too much of it. And I'm very aware of how early you got up and the tolerance of our viewers and listeners for us to wittering on. Just tell me what you're up to now. You do a lot of podcasting too as well. I mean, before we came on air, so to speak, you were telling me, I mean, it's mainly political thinking you do
so
now,
I now do this,
which really rocks your boat, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think, as per our conversation, why are you still talking to politicians? But the truth is, I thought there was a big gap in the market, and to my surprise, it's remained a gap in the market for saying, what makes these people really tick, the people who are making decisions about our lives? And quite often, it's the things you and I have just talked about. In my case, a tragedy. In your case, fighting cancer now. These are the things where you're brought up, what your religion is, what your parents thought or did, who were their friends. And so I do this series of long interviews. I mean, this afternoon I'll be off with Tom Fletcher, the UN Human Rights Coordinator, who I've known ever since he worked for Tony Blair, actually, behind the scenes, a Foreign Office diplomat. So it's not only politicians I do, but that podcast, that chance to have a conversation like we've just had about what makes people tick. Yeah, I love it.
Well, we've just had it, and I hope we can do it all again because, as always, you only just scratch the surface.
Yeah,
we can do another hour and just do entirely different subjects. But, Nick, you certainly are a continuing legend of news, but I'd like to remember you most as Freddie Mercury impersonator and Zach the Zit.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Please don't look it up on YouTube. Don't.